If you're enjoying this tale from the Old West, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more stories of courage and justice from the frontier. Your support helps us bring these forgotten legends to life. The morning mist clung to the towering pines like ghostly fingers, reluctant to release their hold on the Colorado wilderness. Deep in the heart of these ancient woods, where sunlight barely penetrated the thick canopy, lived a man who had chosen silence over society. Jakob Steiner was his name, though few remembered it anymore. For 7 years, he had made these mountains his home, cutting timber with the precision of a master craftsman and the solitude of a hermit. Jakob's cabin sat in a small clearing, built from the very trees he had felled with his own hands. The structure was solid and weathered, like the man himself. His beard had grown long and grey, matching the colour of storm clouds, and his eyes held the depth of someone who had seen too much of civilization's cruelty. The only sounds that marked his days were the rhythmic swing of his axe, the whisper of wind through pine needles, and the occasional call of a mountain hawk circling overhead. This particular morning started like any other. Jakob emerged from his cabin as the first rays of dawn painted the mountainside gold. He stretched his massive frame, muscles still powerful despite his 50 years, and breathed in the crisp mountain air. The scent of pine resin and morning dew filled his nostrils, a perfume far sweeter than any he had known in the bustling towns below. He reached for his double-bladed axe, its handle worn smooth by years of use, and headed toward the grove of aspens he had marked for cutting. But as Jakob approached the grove, something felt different. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Birds that should have been singing their morning songs remained silent. Even the ever-present rustle of small creatures moving through the underbrush had ceased. Jakob's instincts, honed by years of living alone in the wilderness, told him that danger lurked nearby. He gripped his axe tighter and moved forward with the careful steps of a man who understood that survival often depended on caution. The sound reached him first. Voices carried on the wind, harsh and filled with malice. Jakob crept closer, using the thick trunk of an ancient pine as cover. Through the trees, he could see a small clearing where a scene of terrible injustice was unfolding. 3 men on horseback had surrounded a young Indigenous woman, their intentions clearly hostile. The woman stood with dignity despite her obvious fear, her long black hair braided with colored beads that caught the filtered sunlight. The leader of the group was a tall, thin man with a scraggly beard and cold eyes that seemed to enjoy the woman's predicament. His companions were cut from the same cloth, rough men with faces marked by cruelty and greed. They wore the dust-covered clothes of bounty hunters, their weapons well maintained and ready for violence. Jakob recognized the type immediately. He had encountered such men before, in another life he preferred to forget. "Well, well," the leader sneered, his voice carrying clearly through the still air. "What do we have here? A little Indian girl all alone in the big, scary woods." His companions laughed, a sound devoid of any warmth or humanity. The woman remained silent, but Jakob could see her hands moving slightly, as if she were preparing some kind of defense. Around her neck hung a medicine bag decorated with intricate beadwork, and various pouches filled with herbs were attached to her belt. The second hunter, a stocky man with arms like tree trunks, dismounted from his horse and began circling the woman like a predator stalking its prey. "Boss says there's good money for Indian prisoners," he growled. "Live ones are worth more than dead ones, but dead ones are a lot less trouble." The third hunter remained mounted but drew his pistol, keeping it trained on the woman while his eyes scanned the surrounding forest for any sign of rescue that would never come. Jakob felt a familiar fire ignite in his chest, a righteous anger he thought he had buried along with his past. He had come to these mountains to escape the violence and injustice of the civilized world, but here it was again, following him into his sanctuary. The woman's quiet dignity in the face of such obvious danger reminded him of someone he had once failed to protect, someone whose memory still haunted his dreams on the coldest mountain nights. Moving with surprising stealth for such a large man, Jacob began to circle around the clearing. His years in the wilderness had taught him to move like the animals that shared his domain, silent and purposeful. He counted 3 rifles among the hunters, plus at least 2 pistols that he could see. The odds were not in his favor, but Jacob had faced worse before. His axe felt familiar and comforting in his hands, an extension of his will and his determination to see justice done. The leader had dismounted now and was approaching the woman with obvious ill intent. "You're coming with us, little bird," he said, reaching out to grab her arm, but the woman was quicker than he expected. From one of her pouches, she produced a handful of some kind of powder and threw it directly into his face. The man stumbled backward, coughing and rubbing his eyes, temporarily blinded by whatever substance she had used against him. "Witch!" the stocky hunter shouted, raising his rifle. "She's trying to curse us!" But before he could pull the trigger, Jacob emerged from the tree line like an avenging spirit. His axe caught the morning light as it arced through the air, striking the rifle and sending it spinning from the hunter's hands. The man looked up in shock to see this giant figure bearing down on him, beard wild and eyes blazing with controlled fury. Jacob wasted no time with words. He grabbed the stocky hunter by his shirt and lifted him off the ground as if he weighed nothing at all. With a grunt of effort, he hurled the man against the nearest tree trunk. The hunter hit with a sickening thud and slumped to the ground, unconscious but still breathing. Jacob had learned long ago that sometimes mercy was more powerful than vengeance, though these men certainly deserved neither. The mounted hunter tried to bring his pistol to bear on this unexpected threat, but Jacob was already moving. He threw his axe with the accuracy born of years of practice, and the handle struck the gunman squarely in the chest, knocking him from his saddle. The man hit the ground hard and lay still, the wind knocked completely out of him. His horse, startled by the sudden violence, reared up and galloped away into the forest. The leader had recovered enough from the woman's powder to see his companions defeated. His eyes, still watering and red, focused on Jacob with a mixture of fear and rage. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, drawing his own pistol with shaking hands. "This ain't your business, mountain man. Walk away now, and nobody else has to get hurt." But his voice carried no conviction, and Jacob could see the fear creeping into his expression. Jacob said nothing. He had learned that words were often wasted on men like these. Instead, he retrieved his axe and advanced slowly, his massive frame casting a long shadow across the clearing. The leader's pistol wavered as he tried to aim, but his hands were shaking too badly from the powder's effects. He fired once, the shot going wide and startling a flock of crows from a nearby pine. The sound echoed through the forest like thunder, then faded into an oppressive silence. Before the hunter could fire again, Jacob was upon him. One massive hand closed around the man's wrist, squeezing until the pistol fell to the forest floor. With his other hand, Jacob grabbed the front of the man's shirt and lifted him until they were eye to eye. The hunter's feet dangled several inches off the ground as he stared into Jacob's weathered face, reading his own doom in those cold blue eyes. "Please!" the leader gasped, all his earlier bravado gone. "We was just following orders. There's good money for bringing in Indians. We wasn't going to hurt her much." But Jacob's expression didn't change. He had heard such excuses before, from other men who thought money justified any cruelty. With deliberate slowness, he carried the struggling hunter to the edge of the clearing and hung him by his belt from a low tree branch, leaving him dangling like a scarecrow. The forest fell silent again, except for the hunter's muffled protests and the sound of his boots scraping against bark as he tried to free himself. Jacob turned to check on the other 2 men. The stocky one was beginning to stir, groaning and holding his head where it had struck the tree. The mounted hunter was sitting up, gasping for breath, but otherwise unharmed. Both men looked at Jacob with newfound respect and considerable fear. "Get your friend down and get out of here," Jacob said, his voice rusty from disuse, but carrying absolute authority. These were the first words he had spoken to another human being in over a month, and they seemed to hang in the air like a physical presence. "If I see any of you in these mountains again, you won't walk away." The two conscious hunters needed no further encouragement. They quickly freed their leader and helped him to his feet. The three men gathered their weapons and mounted the two remaining horses, the third rider forced to walk alongside as they retreated from the clearing. They looked back once, as if to make sure this mountain giant wasn't following them, then disappeared into the forest. Jacob watched until even the sound of their passage faded away, then turned his attention to the woman who had caused all this trouble. She stood exactly where she had been when the confrontation began, watching him with dark eyes that seemed to see straight through to his soul. She was younger than he had first thought, perhaps 25, with the kind of beauty that came from living in harmony with the natural world. Her doe-skin dress was decorated with intricate beadwork that told stories Jacob couldn't read, and her long hair gleamed like polished obsidian in the dappled sunlight. "Thank you," she said simply, her English accented but clear. "I am called Ayana. I am a healer of my people." She gestured toward the medicine bag at her throat and the various pouches at her belt. "Those men have been hunting me for 3 days. They believe I carry valuable medicine, but they do not understand that true healing comes from the spirit, not from gold or silver." Her voice carried a wisdom that seemed far beyond her years. Jacob nodded, but said nothing. He had learned that silence often communicated more than words, and he was not yet ready to break the solitude he had maintained for so long. But something about this woman's presence felt different from the intrusion of the hunters. Where they had brought violence and chaos into his peaceful world, she seemed to belong here as naturally as the trees and the mountain streams. Ayana seemed to understand his reluctance to speak. She moved to where her small pack had fallen during the confrontation and began gathering the scattered contents. Jacob watched as she carefully collected various herbs and roots, each one placed in its proper pouch with the reverence of someone who understood their true value. Her movements were graceful and economical, wasting no energy on unnecessary gestures. "You live alone here," she observed, not really asking a question. "The forest knows you, the animals do not fear your presence, and the trees bend their branches to let you pass." Jacob raised an eyebrow at this observation. He had indeed noticed that the wildlife seemed comfortable around him, but he had attributed it to his quiet lifestyle rather than any mystical connection with nature. As if reading his thoughts, Ayana smiled. "You think like a white man still, even after all these years in the wilderness, but your spirit has learned to listen to the old voices. That is why you came to help me. Not because of duty or law, but because the forest told you it was right." She finished packing her belongings and stood, shouldering the pack with practiced ease. Jacob found himself curious, despite his usual reticence. This woman spoke of things he had felt, but never put into words. The peace he had found in these mountains, the sense of belonging that had grown stronger with each passing season, the way he seemed to know which trees were ready for harvesting and which should be left to grow. Perhaps there was more to his exile than simple escape from civilization's cruelties. "Where will you go now?" Jacob asked, surprising himself by speaking. His voice seemed foreign after the long silence, but Ayana's smile suggested she was pleased to hear it. "Those men will not give up easily. They spoke of money, which means someone has placed a bounty on your head. These mountains may not be safe for you anymore." He gestured toward the path the hunters had taken, though they were long gone. Ayana considered his question for a moment, her dark eyes studying his face as if reading something written there. "I go where the spirits guide me," she said eventually. "My people have been scattered by the white man's hunger for gold and land. Some have gone to the reservations, others have fled deeper into the wilderness. I carry the old knowledge, the healing ways that must not be lost. I go where I am needed most. The conviction in her voice reminded Jacob of something he had once possessed, but thought he had lost forever. A sense of purpose, a reason for being that went beyond mere survival. He had come to these mountains to escape the world, but perhaps the world had followed him here for a reason. Perhaps his years of solitude had been preparation for this moment, this choice between continued isolation and a return to purpose. "There is a box canyon about 5 miles north of here," Jacob said, making a decision that surprised him even as he spoke the words. "Hidden behind a waterfall. The entrance is difficult to find unless you know where to look. You could rest there safely while you decide your next path." He paused, then added, "I could show you the way if you wish. Make sure those hunters haven't circled back to follow your trail." Ayana's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountain peaks. "You have been alone too long, Jakob Steiner," she said, using his name though he had never told it to her. "Your spirit hungers for connection, for meaning beyond the swing of your axe and the fall of trees. Perhaps the spirits brought those evil men here not to harm me, but to wake something that has been sleeping in your heart." Jacob felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. "How do you know my name?" he asked, though part of him already suspected the answer. This woman carried more than herbs and healing knowledge. She possessed the kind of wisdom that saw beyond the surface of things, that read the stories written in a man's face and the choices carved into his soul. "The forest whispers many things to those who know how to listen," Ayana replied cryptically. "It speaks of a man who came here carrying great pain, seeking peace in solitude. It tells of strong hands that have learned gentleness, of a warrior's heart that has chosen mercy over vengeance. The trees remember your story, even if you try to forget it." She began walking toward the north, trusting that he would follow. Jacob stood for a moment longer in the clearing where violence had so recently threatened. The morning mist was beginning to lift, and shafts of sunlight painted golden columns through the forest. His old life seemed to call to him from the silence between the trees, reminding him of responsibilities abandoned and promises broken. But Ayana's presence offered something he had not dared hope for, the possibility of redemption through service to something greater than himself. With a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff into unknown air, Jacob shouldered his axe and followed the healer into the deeper forest. Behind them, the clearing settled back into its natural silence. But the peace felt different now. It was no longer the peace of isolation, but the quiet that comes after a storm has passed and the world begins to heal. The journey to the hidden canyon took them along paths that only someone with Jacob's intimate knowledge of these mountains could have found. They moved through stands of aspen, whose leaves whispered secrets in the mountain breeze, crossed streams that ran crystal clear over beds of smooth stone, and climbed rocky slopes where eagles soared overhead. Ayana moved with the fluid grace of someone who belonged in the wilderness, never stumbling on the treacherous footing, never complaining about the pace. As they walked, she spoke quietly of her people's struggles, of traditions being lost and wisdom being forgotten in the rush toward what white men called progress. Jacob listened, remembering his own reasons for leaving civilization behind. The greed, the violence, the way powerful men used others like tools to be discarded when they were no longer useful. Perhaps he and this indigenous healer were not so different after all. The hidden canyon was everything Jacob had promised. A secret sanctuary where a waterfall cascaded down smooth rock walls to form a crystal-clear pool. The entrance was concealed behind the falling water, requiring them to navigate a narrow ledge slick with spray. Inside, the canyon opened into a natural amphitheater where wildflowers grew in impossible profusion, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with an almost magical quality. "This is a sacred place," Ayana breathed, her eyes wide with wonder. I can feel the presence of the ancestors here, the spirits of all who have found refuge in this sanctuary. She knelt by the pool and dipped her fingers in the water, bringing them to her lips to taste. The water carries healing power. This canyon has been blessed by the Great Spirit. Her reverence transformed the hidden valley into something more than mere stone and water. Jakob had always felt peaceful in this place, but seeing it through Ayana's eyes revealed depths he had never noticed. The way the light danced on the water, the perfect acoustics that turned even a whisper into something profound, the abundance of medicinal plants growing wild in the canyon's protected environment. Perhaps his discovery of this place had been guided by the same forces that had brought the healer into his life. As the sun reached its zenith overhead, they made camp in a grove of ancient cedars whose branches formed a natural shelter. Ayana unpacked her healing supplies, while Jacob gathered firewood and prepared a simple meal from the provisions he always carried. They worked together with an ease that suggested long familiarity, though they had known each other for less than a day. That evening, as the fire crackled between them and stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Ayana shared stories of her people's history. She spoke of great chiefs and wise women, of a time when the land was vast and free, of harmony between all living things. Jakob found himself sharing his own story in return. His years as a lawman in a corrupt town, the innocent people he had failed to protect, the choice to disappear rather than become part of the system he had sworn to serve. "You did not run away," Ayana said when he finished speaking. "You went into the wilderness to purify your spirit, to learn what you could not learn in the world of men. Now you are ready to return, not as the man you were, but as the man you were meant to become." Her words carried the weight of prophecy, as if she could see a future he could not yet imagine. The days that followed brought an unexpected harmony to the hidden canyon. Jakob found himself drawn into routines he had not experienced since his childhood, when his grandmother had taught him about the healing properties of mountain plants. Ayana showed him which roots could ease pain, which leaves could draw poison from wounds, and which flowers held the power to calm troubled minds. In return, he shared his knowledge of the forest's secrets, where the sweetest berries grew, which caves offered shelter from storms, and how to read the signs that warned of approaching danger. On the third morning, as mist rose from the pool like spirits ascending to the heavens, Ayana approached Jacob with a troubled expression. "I have seen visions in the sacred smoke," she said, referring to the bundle of sage and sweetgrass she burned each dawn. "Those hunters were not alone. More men come, led by one whose heart is black as winter night. They seek not just me, but something I carry, something they believe will make them rich beyond imagining." Jakob set down the fish he had been cleaning for their breakfast. "What do they think you have?" he asked, though he suspected the answer would reveal more about the greed of men than any actual treasure. He had learned long ago that civilized people often attributed magical properties to things they did not understand, especially when those things belonged to indigenous peoples. Ayana reached into her medicine bag and withdrew an object that made Jacob's breath catch in his throat. It was a crystal unlike anything he had ever seen, perfectly clear but shot through with veins of gold that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. As she held it up to catch the morning sun, rainbows danced across the canyon walls like living things celebrating the dawn. "This is the heart of the mountain," she explained, her voice filled with reverence. "It was given to my grandmother by the earth spirits themselves in the time before the white man came to these lands. It does not heal the body, it heals the spirit, shows the path forward when all seems lost. My grandmother passed it to my mother, and she to me. But there are those who believe it is made of gold and precious stones, who would kill to possess it." Jacob understood now why the hunters had been so persistent. Gold fever was a madness that drove men to unspeakable acts, and the crystal did indeed look like it contained veins of the precious metal. "How many are coming?" he asked, his mind already shifting into the tactical thinking that had kept him alive during his years as a lawman. The peaceful interlude was ending. Violence was approaching their sanctuary like a storm front rolling over the mountains. "I saw 7 riders in my vision," Ayana replied, carefully returning the crystal to her medicine bag. "They will reach the outer boundaries of your territory by sunset. Their leader is a man called Black Pete Morrison, a name that brings fear even to hardened criminals. He takes what he wants and leaves only death behind." Her words carried the weight of terrible knowledge, as if she had seen the aftermath of Morrison's cruelty in her visions. Jacob's blood turned cold at the mention of that name. Black Pete Morrison was indeed a legend, but not the kind that parents told their children as bedtime stories. He was a killer and a thief who had terrorized mining camps throughout Colorado and Wyoming. Jacob had encountered him once, years ago, during his time as a lawman. Morrison had escaped justice then, leaving behind 3 dead deputies and a town full of terrified witnesses. The man was cunning as a wolf and twice as vicious. "We need to leave," Jacob said immediately. "This canyon may be hidden, but Morrison has ways of finding what he seeks. He probably has trackers with him, men who can read sign better than most can read books. If we stay here, we'll be trapped like rabbits in a warren." But even as he spoke, he knew that running would only delay the inevitable. Morrison was not a man who gave up easily, especially when gold was involved. Ayana shook her head slowly. "The spirits have shown me another path," she said. "This is where we make our stand. The canyon will protect us, but only if we trust in its power and fight as one spirit with 2 bodies. You have the warrior's skill, and I have the wisdom of my ancestors. Together we can turn their greed against them." Her certainty was absolute, as if she had already seen their victory written in the sacred smoke. Jacob wanted to argue, to use logic and experience to convince her that retreat was their only option. 7 armed men against 1 aging lawman and a healer seemed like impossible odds. But something in her eyes stopped him, a depth of knowledge that went beyond mere human understanding. Perhaps there were forces at work here that his rational mind could not grasp. Perhaps faith was sometimes stronger than steel. As the day progressed, they prepared for the coming confrontation with the methodical care of generals planning a crucial battle. Jacob showed Ayana the narrow approaches to the canyon, the places where the walls form natural choke points, the hidden caves where supplies could be stored or desperate defenders could make their last stand. She, in turn, began preparing medicines that could heal wounds quickly and powders that could blind or disorient attackers. The afternoon sun was painting the canyon walls crimson when they heard the first sounds of approaching horses. Jacob positioned himself on a ledge overlooking the main approach, his rifle loaded and ready. Ayana remained by the sacred pool, the heart of the mountain glowing softly in her hands as she whispered prayers in her native tongue. The air itself seemed to thicken with anticipation, as if the very stones were holding their breath. Black Pete Morrison appeared first, riding a coal-black stallion that matched his reputation. He was a tall man with graying hair and eyes like chips of winter ice. His face bore the scars of a dozen fights, and his hands rested casually on the butts of twin pistols worn low on his hips. Behind him rode 6 other men, all hardened killers who had thrown their lots in with his particular brand of evil. "I know you're in there, girl," Morrison called, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. "And I know you've got company, some mountain man who thinks he can play hero. Come out now, hand over that pretty rock you're carrying, and maybe we'll make it quick. Keep hiding, and we'll take our time with both of you." His laughter was like the sound of breaking glass, sharp and full of malice. Jacob sighted down his rifle barrel, Morrison's chest centered in the crosshairs. One shot would end the threat here and now, but something held him back. Perhaps it was the memory of who he used to be, the lawman who had believed in justice rather than simple vengeance. Or perhaps it was Ayana's influence, her belief that there was a better way to resolve this confrontation. "Last chance," Morrison shouted. "I'm counting to 10, then we're coming in after you." But before he could begin his count, Ayana stepped into view at the canyon's mouth. She stood tall and proud, the heart of the mountain visible in her outstretched hands, its golden veins catching the dying light and throwing it back like captured fire. "You want this?" she called, her voice carrying clearly across the distance. "Then come and take it. But know that you face not just flesh and blood, but the power of the earth itself. This canyon is sacred ground, and it will not suffer the presence of evil men." As she spoke, a wind began to rise from nowhere, stirring the dust at the horses' feet and making the riders' mounts dance nervously. Morrison's eyes fixed on the crystal with the hungry intensity of a man possessed. "That's it," he breathed, more to himself than to his companions. "That's the stone the old Indian told me about before he died. Worth more than all the gold in California." He spurred his horse forward, drawing both pistols as he charged toward the canyon entrance. His men followed, whooping like demons, as they rode toward what they thought would be easy prey. But the canyon had other plans. As Morrison's horse reached the narrow entrance, the wind suddenly intensified, becoming a howling gale that seemed to come from all directions at once. The horses reared and shied, their riders fighting to maintain control as dust and debris filled the air. The sacred pool began to churn, as if stirred by invisible hands, and the waterfall's roar grew to a deafening crescendo. Jakob used the confusion to his advantage, picking off two of the riders with carefully aimed shots. The men tumbled from their saddles, wounded but not killed, a mercy they did not deserve but received nonetheless. Morrison and the remaining 4 men managed to gain the shelter of some boulders near the canyon mouth, but they found themselves pinned down by Jacob's accurate fire from above. "It's just tricks," Morrison shouted to his men, though his voice carried less conviction than before. "Mirrors and smoke, like them stage magicians use. Keep moving." But even as he spoke, the very rocks around them seemed to shift and move, creating new paths and closing old ones. What had been a simple canyon entrance moments before had become a maze that seemed to change with each blink of their eyes. Ayana raised the heart of the mountain higher, and its inner light grew brighter, casting strange shadows that moved independently of their sources. "This is your last warning," she called. "Leave this place and never return, or face the full wrath of the mountain spirits." "You have spilled enough blood in your lifetime, Black Pete Morrison. Spill no more here, or become one with the stone you seek so desperately." For a moment, Morrison hesitated. He was a man who believed in nothing but gold and gunpowder, but even he could not deny the evidence of his senses. The canyon was defending itself, using forces beyond his understanding or control. His remaining men looked to him for leadership, but fear was beginning to creep into their eyes like poison spreading through their veins. Then greed overcame superstition, and Morrison raised his pistols toward Ayana. "I don't care if you've got the devil himself helping you," he snarled. "That stone is mine." But as he pulled the triggers, Jacob's rifle spoke from above. The shot took Morrison high in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending both pistols flying from nerveless fingers. The wounded outlaw stumbled backward, clutching his shoulder as blood seeped between his fingers. His remaining men, seeing their leader fallen and facing forces they could not comprehend, broke and ran. They mounted their horses and fled into the gathering darkness, leaving Morrison alone and helpless in the sacred canyon. Ayana approached the wounded man with the same compassion she would show any injured creature. She knelt beside him and began examining his wound, her hands gentle despite the evil he represented. "The bullet passed through cleanly," she announced. "You will live, though you will never again draw a gun with that arm." Her healing instincts overcame any desire for revenge. Morrison looked up at her with eyes that held more confusion than hatred. "Why?" he gasped. "Why help me after what I tried to do?" The question seemed to pain him more than his physical wound, as if kindness was a language he no longer remembered how to speak. His whole worldview was crumbling around him like a house built on sand. Tell us in the comments, do you believe that even the most hardened criminals can find redemption through acts of unexpected mercy? What do you think Morrison's fate should be, and how might this encounter change his black heart forever?